Why can't Trump speak to Netanyahu this way?
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now.
United States politics always have to manage the public opinion. So right now is going to be Europe versus America. Politicians in Europe are getting very, very, very emotional there.
Wow.
Could you take on Russia by yourselves?
Well, Europe is in danger. They're struggling in almost every aspect.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the I3 Pulse. A fight breaks out in the Oval Office. Has Trump thrown Ukraine under Putin's bus? Can Europe take on Russia alone? And is it over for Zelensky? Today on I3 Pulse. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. How's it going?
Good.
So I have an interesting clip for you to react to, and I want to get your take on this. Is legit stage. What's going on here? What's the real issue here? So this is Trump and Zelensky.
From the very beginning of the war,
You're not in a good position. You don't have the
the
cards right now. With us, you start having
not playing
cards.
cards.
But right now, you don't.
I'm
You're
very
playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War III.
what do you think
You're
about?
gambling with
What do you
World
think
War
about?
III. And
You-
what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's
with
back
all
to you.
respect to your
Far
country.
more than a lot of people said.
So what do you think about that? Like the guy got piled in the Oval Office. We've never really seen a scene like that between two international leaders. Maybe with the opposition, with the government shutdown, but we've never seen it in the Oval Office between two
Ever,
presidents.
I'd say
Yeah.
never. You know, it's just again, this is like Trump bringing his reality TV show to the politics. And to be honest, definitely this is staged without a doubt. I'm not saying from Zelensky's side, but from like this pre-planned. It's not like something that just came about and there's like a no, this was planned. Like Trump wanted to create this mess on TV, invited the media into the Oval Office, published it to the world, especially to the American people. It's not dumb to do this. This is very, very, very disrespectful, really, for America, for Americans, and so forth. And maybe this was one of the points. And that's why they kept asking him, do you want to say thank you have you never ever said a thank you before to the American people or the president and blah, blah.
Did you say thank you today? This is a thank you today.
This is like literally like a drama. And what's the point? The point is, now again, Zelensky literally at the end of the day is an American stooge, really. The question is was he part of the game from before? Did they tell him this was going to happen, or was it natural? It seems basically a person who gets disrespected that much, he would just walk out, really. But just like it was more childish. So that's what makes me feel that he's also was included in the plan. Maybe not his team, but him. But nevertheless, it doesn't really matter. Definitely. The Trump and his team planned this for a reason. And the reason is to tell the American people, this guy's disrespecting us. This guy doesn't deserve our money. We need to cut the funding for Ukraine. This is really the number one objective.
Now I see the objective for Donald Trump and JD Vance. What's the benefit to Zelensky? Was he just forced to just sit there and tolerate that, or what does he get something out of this?
No. Zelensky had to come here, whether he likes it or not, because the United States was the biggest supporter. So when they tell him come, that's it. But as I said, he's a stooge, really. And the second objective of the Trump administration is to really solidify their position. And I think today they made it concrete. Just a few minutes ago, they published that they will not fund the war in Ukraine anymore. So that means basically they're going to throw this on Europe. So this is the second objective, is to really officially say, Europe, you're on your own. We have nothing to do with it. We're not going to pay a single dollar. All the billions of dollars that we used to spend is going to go back to America, which is what the MAGA movement is all about. So again, the American people like this, and this whole orchestration of this drama fits within the MAGA themes and the MAGA slogans. And definitely from a political perspective, Trump wants to put Europe under pressure. The goal is to crush Europe right now. This is what America wants to do. And nobody says it out loud, really, not even Europe, because devastation if they say that, even themselves. And they do actually. They have said it. They've said that America have let us down. America have kicked us out of our home, and they took our inheritance and some crazy stuff like that. Like these politicians in Europe are getting very, very, very emotional there.
Wow.
Like a breakup between girlfriend boyfriend right there. Yeah.
Speaking on emotion, right? Like we said, recent news. I think Norway won't refuel U.S. Navy vessels, and Zelensky's at the UK. right now as we speak, and Prime Minister Keir Starmer mentioning that Zelensky has the full backing of the UK. All the UK, his Twitter was all about him saying thank you, because each European leader was just saying I stand with you, and he's just saying thank you very much, literally right after the Oval Office meeting for like dozens of them. So can the EU really step in and support Ukraine? Can they take on Russia?
Well, you heard what happened with Starmer when he was in the Oval Office with Trump. He asked him directly, "Can you guys take on Russia?" And the guy, definitely it was a big rebuke. So even Starmer, who is the UK, the UK is the closest partner to the United States. Period. It is the closest partner for the United States on planet Earth. And to be honest, he got smashed. Like, he got schooled and smashed and humiliated multiple times. I don't know if you have the videos. We can show some of that.
And that's at the
Could you
core of
take
the
on Russia by yourselves?
Well,
Damn, that's a big slap, man. Like, actually, I didn't catch that one part. I mean, I saw the rest of this interview, but my gosh, like, he really smashed them. Like, no, we're not gonna back up Britain. Britain's on its own, and then Starmer basically tried to kind of giggle and say, well, we always backed each other up and so forth.
And he kind of said, like, I'm not being evasive, but yeah, we'll have UK's back, but you guys are good by yourselves. Like, what is it really that Trump is playing at here? Because he pulled out the funding from Ukraine, as you mentioned earlier, and he's saying all these things. What does this mean for global security? Like, does this mean that Putin is just going to go in and take over Europe and become the czar of Europe now?
Not necessarily, but first, it's not a global security, it's European security. The whole thing is European security. And Europe, look, the Europeans are not dumb. Like, they knew that was happening, and they already announced in February 12th, I think, the Weimar Group. There's a new military alliance in Europe that includes mostly EU countries and Britain this time, to defend now Europe from outside forces. And so that's why now, in Britain today, they hosted Zelensky, and they're discussing the whole issue. And by the way, all the European leaders, all of them, like everybody, the Spanish, the Italian, definitely the German had one of the loudest voices, really louder even than France, and France definitely included, and Britain, which is the big five really in Europe. They were all saying, we are with Ukraine 100%. We will never let Ukraine down. We will support Ukraine, and we will only agree to a peace that has sustainable, long-lasting ceasefire. So that, because, they don't want Europe to go into another chaos. Because, see, this war, it does cost Russia, but it also costs Europe. They're both, Europe is even losing more than Russians, right? The Russians just like, as long as the conflict is there, the more there's pressure on Europe. So it's a big European issue. It's a European crisis. It's a regional security issue that could become global, but, I don't see that happening very soon. And can Russia basically invade Europe? As we spoke about this last time. I don't think the Russians can invade Europe, but they can cause enough damage to weaken it. And I don't think the Europeans have a solution. Like, what do they want? The Ukrainians, which is part of Europe, really, they want to be part of NATO. And Russia says this is a red line. So how are they going to, reach a deal? We need to see what's the political finesse of the Europeans and the Germans and the French in specific. And let's see if also the UK is really... The UK historically always backstabs Europe. This is the history of the United
Brexit,
Kingdom.
right?
Yeah. Well, that's one of them. But historically, it's the same thing. Let's see right now if the UK is feeling the pinch, because the UK-Russian relationship is always sour. The UK sees Europe as a buffer zone between it and Russia. So if Russians come into Europe and weakens Europe, that means strategically the UK is in a big mess, and the UK cannot defeat anybody alone, because they're a small little tiny island. At the end of the day, whether it's demographic, definitely still basically a very strong country militarily, economically, and so forth. But historically, it cannot withstand the shocks alone. Always have to basically create these alliances, whether continental European ones or transatlantic ones with the United States. It's always been the game. This has been the game all the time. And the minute people cut those relationships, Britain will sink into the ocean, really.
Speaking of these relationships to keep Europe afloat, what's France's stance? What's Germany's stance? Like, these are the other big players in Europe.
It's unified right now. It's all, Europe is in danger. It's going to, right now they need to increase the spending. Like, don't forget this expenditure on Ukraine war is 40% United States, 60% Europe. So right now the United States pulled out. You have to almost double your expenditure on Ukraine, and that's going to smash the European economy. And it's not about money, really. It's about basically, can you create the supply chains to create that? Can you get the material? Can you get the supply chain? Can you get the resources? Can you get the manpower? Can you get the training? There's a million things.
And they're struggling with that.
They're struggling in almost every aspect. It's not just about money. Money is definitely one big thing. And the military readiness is not there. The supply chains are not there. Their economy can take the hit. Like, it's just everything, the social fabric. So Europe is in a big mess right now. Really, they're frantic. But look, I see it as a positive thing for Europe. I think with this shock, it created this unification. Like, with unification comes strength. So the Europeans, again, unlike the Muslims, they understand that with the unity comes strength, and they immediately basically created an alliance. Immediately, overnight. The Weimar Group was basically created earlier from before, but this is how it is. They understand that unification is the key for independence, and they don't want to lose their independence, and they don't want to lose their stature in the world. And yeah.
Okay, so Europe's uniting. Seems like Europe might rise from the situation. Russia could be strengthened with the alliance with the U.S., China as well in play. Could this lead to, really, because if Trump is backstabbing his closest allies, you mentioned the UK and the US are supposed to be close allies, and he's backstabbing everybody, can this actually lead to alienation from the US and more of a multipolar world?
Well, we already are in a multipolar world, right? Or maybe you mean it's already, right now it's bipolar. Could it become pluralistic? Or tripolar with Russia. Look, like Europe is always like one of the sides. It is a weaker side, but could they become a bigger power? To be honest, let's see. It's not easy, but I think with unification, if they can get to a peace treaty in Ukraine and they can pick themselves up again, but the thing is basically, the United States have them in a chokehold in multiple ways. But let's see. The news about Norway was very interesting. Where the Norway, what was it? They're blocking some energy ships.
Yeah, they're not allowing the U.S. Navy vessels to refuel, which is interesting because doesn't the U.S. have bases on Norway? Like what does that mean?
They could basically close these bases. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a treaty, right? So this is one response, it seems, from Europe. So right now is going to be Europe versus America.
Okay, so we see, like, what are the levers each player can take, right? Because this is very interesting, right? When there's a power dynamic and two people are fighting each other, there's different levers each one can play to kind of hit each other back and make each other feel the pain.
Yeah.
So what is the levers America can pull? What is the levers that Europe can pull? Just
putting all of them together is might be too much for an episode. But like right now, the Norwegians basically, they want to create a choke point for the Americans, at least from a military perspective. So that's the first thing they use. But to be honest, the Americans are using tariffs. This is the favorite word for. I mean, he says it's like his favorite word in the dictionary right now. So what happens is basically he can hit the economy real hard and crumble the all of the European economies. Why? Because there's interdependence between Europe and the United States. There's also a big interdependence between Europe and China. And the United States can put tariffs on companies for dealing with China. So the favorite tool for the Americans is tariffs. Now, how's the Europeans gonna respond? Well, we need to wait and see. But can they also the tariff wars will hurt everybody. So I don't think the Europeans and just like the Canadians will always use it in response. They're not going to initiate it. You see what I'm saying? That's why when they now wanted to hit the Americans with something, they're like, look, we're going to take your naval bases away. If you're not going to... So I think this is a signal. It's a signal that says, if you're not going to support us militarily, then you will not exist in Europe.
But do they have the power to do that to America?
Look, it's balanced because, see, the Europeans, they use the Americans to defend them. There's a missile shield, there's lots of stuff in Poland and many different countries that protects Europe and the Americans and then threatens the Russians. The Europeans start dismantling some of that stuff and replacing it with some of theirs, and that means basically the Americans might be vulnerable because now the Russians could have the Americans from the other side of the of the ocean. So it depends. I believe basically the most important thing is to see if they can, who can diplomatically create a deal. Who can negotiate better? Can Europe negotiate with Russia? Right? And maybe one of the questions we need to still investigate, see what is it. So the Russians met the Americans, and the Americans told them, look, we'll back off from this war. We're not gonna support the Ukrainians anymore, with the whole pretense that the Europeans and the Russians can reach a deal on the fate of Ukraine that will lead to peace, which will help Putin first, definitely, and will help Europe. So the Americans pulled out. But do they have the keys to reach this resolution? If they do, well, it'll be a big win for both Russia and Europe.
So going back to the U.S., Senator Lindsey Graham made a statement after having lunch with Donald Trump, President Trump, and he said that he's calling for Zelensky to step down and Ukraine to send someone else better to negotiate and discuss with them. So is this the end of Zelensky?
Well, again, I think this is part of the show. I think this is part of the show, and people will be surprised that many things are set for public consumption. So the Americans are always now making Zelensky seems the enemy, seems the evil person, seems the one that took advantage of American money. That's really it at the end of the day. Mostly the president in Ukraine is dominated by foreign powers, and the internal whatever is left from the elites in Ukraine and in the army generals.
I saw a very interesting bunch of posts trending all over Twitter. And this was talking about that, oh, look, why can't Trump speak to Netanyahu this way? Right? Zelensky, he'll bully him, but then Netanyahu, he'll pull the chair or speak politely to him. Like, why is that? Like you mentioned many times, the U.S. is the one who is more in power, but Trump has never given the backhand in public to Netanyahu like he's done to Zelensky. Why is that?
Well, he did, but basically it's like between the lines, right? They have to be careful. Why? Because the United States, it's all about public opinion. The United States politics always have to manage the public opinion. If the public opinion backfires, sadly the politicians or the statesmen would have limited choices to maneuver. So that's why the Americans will need to always showcase that they are in support of Israel, and they are in support of Israel, even when there's differences. And that's why it's always going to be respectful. But with other third world countries and countries such as Ukraine, they just trash them. But see, concluding that Israel has power over America is stupid and shallow, to be honest. It is not correct. The one who's funding a country has control over it, right? So, Israel does not fund the United States, the other way around. So these are numbers.
Russia and America pushing Russia out of Syria, potentially. Now, is this something that could be done in exchange of giving them parts of Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine rather, and then they basically leave Syria and they don't get any ports? Is that related to what's happening in Ukraine?
Yeah, it's a very good question. No, I don't think so. I think it was like what basically when Trump was telling Zelensky, you don't have cards. When you don't have cards, you can't negotiate. The Russians don't have cards in Syria. All the cards are in the American hands, so they don't need to negotiate anything there. The Russians are not, they don't have a card there to negotiate with it.
Speaking of cards for Russia, recently they've actually had a agreement with Iran, a defense pact, where they're providing even their fighter jets, where they provided anti-aircraft missiles to Iran, and Iran's been providing Russia with their drones. So what does this mean for the region, right? That this new agreement coming between
to be honest,
Iran and Russia?
basically these agreements between Russia and China, Russia and Iran, every few months you hear there's new agreement, and nothing gets delivered really. All this is just fake, really. To be honest, I would say it's fake mostly. And not all of it, but the extent of it is fake. But it's used for signaling that the Russians can create a military problem for the United States by arming the Iranians. So this is somewhat half a card. Because why? People might ask me why are you saying it's half a card? The reason it's half a card because the Iranian regime again is more is leans more the United States to the Russians, and people might find this surprising, but we spoke about it a million times. The Iranians understand that their interest and their existence within the Middle East context must be by keeping the American master happy, right? So they deal with the Americans in that situation, and they organize their foreign policy based upon that situation. And the Russians know if they give them all that stuff, the Iranians will not create the threat that the Russians want within the region. You understand? And that's why they don't give it. Otherwise, if the Russians knew that the Iranians are with them 100%, or at least they're independent 100%, where if they give them certain weapons and so forth, they'll expand their influence in the region, they would have gave it long time ago, because it creates the dependency that the Russian wants, right, to Iran, and then Iran will expand, and then that expansion of Iran will give a leverage for Russia. But they will never. They spoke about it for decades. To be honest, this is not like weeks or months or years. This is a long time. For the longest time, the Russians say, "Well, we're going to give Iran this. We're going to give Iran this." Nothing happens. They give bits and pieces for an exchange of services or exchange of whatever it is.
So Russian leverage, the whole minerals agreement that U.S. has with Ukraine, right? When I was looking at it, I was like, okay, this is pretty interesting, right? U.S. is just taking a bunch of stuff and getting, something out of this, right? As they usually do. But one journalist pointed this out to Donald Trump, and he avoided this question at the Oval Office, when he was with Zelensky, where she asked that actually a lot of these deposits, of these mineral deposits, are in Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine. So how is that going to work?
Well, it works, but because see, at the end of the day, the Ukrainians, they claim all this minerals is for them. So the Americans are saying, look, we take half, you take half. But see, you got to pay, right? When the date comes, you got to pay, and that means, let's say there's 60% on the Ukrainian side and 40% within the occupied side under the Russians. Well, the Americans are going to take their 50%, and then the Ukrainians needs to go grab their 40 from the Russians.
Oh my God! So they're cleaning these guys out.
Well, you got to pay, right? Like if you need services from Americans, you got to pay.
Well, jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh.
God bless you.
Appreciate your time.
Okay, you too.
And we tell everybody, guys, like, subscribe, comment. Don't be viewing incognito and hiding behind your chair and your computer screen. Make sure you follow us. Make sure you share these videos, because we're going to keep commenting and on these topics and watch this space. We'll see you next time on i3 Pulse. Assalamu alaikum.